And we're back. Welcome back, everyone. We're going to start with this session with Mykola Gurov on the sweet, sweet sugar rush of Kotlin in your tests. Enjoy.
Yes, hello everyone. I think most of us do write tests sometimes. And also many of us read tests and maintain tests. And I think we can all agree that it's not always very easy. There is a certain skill and focus, and it's slightly different than the production code, even when we treat this the same way as production code. So the bad thing is that there is no silver bullet, and Kotlin will also not make your test perfect. But the good news is that there are two things. There are features of the language, in our case Kotlin, that can make some things a little bit smoother, a little bit better. And in the grand scheme, it can make a difference. So I would like to talk about why I find Kotlin very nice for particularly writing the tests, even sometimes more interesting for me than the production code, although there are some goodies on production code as well. So who am I? I am Mykola Gurov. I work now as a backend software engineer at iptq. It's an insurance company. We have a hub here in the Hofdorp and also in Zurich. Before that, and we are 100% Kotlin on the backend, which is nice. Before that, I worked at bol.com. This is where my experience with Kotlin started. And this is where, in the first service that we were extracting from a big monolith and decided to write it in Kotlin, I noticed that the tests are starting to get much nicer than I used to. Oh, I messed up my slides, but it doesn't matter because it will be all about the code. And I will switch to the code, and we'll start looking at some simple examples. So for this presentation, I made some simple model. Let's say we have some data class, or in Java it would be just class, maybe annotated with Lombok. And we want to do some functionality with it and testing. It's relatively simple, couple of fields. On production, often you will, depending on your domain and use case, you might have much deeper and longer, but that's already good enough. Some payment, some user ID policies, amount and currencies, and we have some simple business logic. Let's say we want to do some sum up of total amounts by payments, and depending on the direction, we will do minus or plus. And we want to test it. Okay, nothing fancy here. How would we test it? If we were doing it very naively, and sometimes we do it at the beginning, we could say something like, okay, I have a test. I want to sum things up. I want to call my method with list of payments. I have two payments in this example. And I need to provide all the details for my payments because I have to construct them. And then at the end, I say, assert that the result is as I expect. It's not too dramatic here, but even in this simple, small example, we see that there is lots of noise that's not important for us. We don't care about user IDs. We know that in the code, but when I'm reading this code, especially in the more complicated scenarios, I don't know whether user ID is important or not here. Maybe it is, maybe not. Is it important that they have the same user ID? So I don't know. Hopefully not. Same policy, amounts, and so on. It's good to have tests that are focused, that are saying this was given, these are the important things, and that's why they matter to us. Of course, we can work this around in various ways. The ultimate solution in Java would be a builder. We could have a test builder, for example, if we don't want to change the defaults in our production code, which is not always a good idea to have test defaults there. We'd have a simple builder which would basically mirror the fields that we have in our main object and provide some simple logic to build it. And then we can just say We have a list of our payments, and there we only deviate for the fields that are interesting to us. And then we have the same test, but much more focused. Builders are good. There are two slight problems with this. First of all, builders sometimes feels a little bit too heavy for simple objects. Second is that it's a little bit noisy. Still, it can be better. It can be more readable. We will look a little about readability a little bit later with DSL and type safe builders. But now I will focus on another option. We could also do the functions. So again, in Java and other languages, when we're testing something, we want to hide some irrelevant details. We'll say we have a function, payment with amount, just one, some big decimal. Internally, we can even use builder if we already have builder, or we can use something else. We can just construct the object with the defaults. That's fine. It can work. The problem is that when we're starting to add more variations, if we want to have, I want, for example, to test in the first example, I was only focusing on the currency, but now I say, well, depending on the direction, we can have different values. So if direction is incoming or outgoing, the payments will be deducted or subtracted. Fine, we could do this in Java with old functions that will either create eventually a maze of different functions with different parameters, with different names that are calling each other, or doing lots of repetitive logic, depending how you do it. Possible, but sometimes difficult to go through. What's nice in Kotlin, and I think those who are working with Kotlin already know this, this is not a surprise. We have those nice, beautiful functions where we can have variable names, parameter names, and the defaults. And that basically means that at any point I can say, you know what, I don't care about what was here currency in this function that provides us the payment. I will just fall back on default. I will not mention it. I will only mention what's important for my test. Amounts, direction. I can swap the amount and direction if I want, because in some other case, direction might be more important and amount is the secondary, and so on and so forth. And this is already on itself for simple flat objects is a huge benefit for me. So just by this, we had a very nice test suites in some, especially in my case, domain. Well, in some cases, let's not go into the details. There are two shortcomings of the functions for me. The first is when you have nested objects, because you can play a little bit with varargs or parameters, but it might become a little bit messy over the time. And another problem is reusability. It's difficult to reuse the same builder function in different contexts. And I will show the workarounds for that in a second. But before that, I would also like to point out yet another small syntax sugar that Kotlin adds us. It was already mentioned on the first presentation that we had today. It's the extension functions. So in this case, there are many great use for that. But in this case, the original total amount, production code, it was accepting lists, which is good. But for us, that means that if we want to use it as it is, we need to add a little bit of extra noise to our test. List of. We need to say that it's a list of. And I'm using the more or less recent Kotlin, so I really like to add commas everywhere, but minor notes, very convenient, especially for Git diffs, very low. Not a big deal, but again, because in the tests, especially when they grow, every extra bit of noise, it adds up. It adds to our scanning capability. It distracts us a little bit. It's very good that we can easily say, even without adjusting the original class, you know what, I just want to have a simple conversion from vararg to total amount. And it will be, now I can just pass objects without the unnecessary list. And if I don't have control over the class, maybe it's even a Java class, no problem, I can use it. If I don't want to push it there, because if we have a production code, I want also it to be focused on production use cases. I don't have to push it, I can have it in my test. It can be specific to my test, I can have a testing library. Works nicely. Questions so far on functions, comments? Bart.
So with the with the introduction of this extension method, don't you run the risk that you lose the connection between the test and what production code it's actually testing?
Of course, there is a risk, and that's why you want to have it as simple and clean as possible to the original. In this example, you see all we do is minor conversion between one type input to the other. There is no functional, there is no logic or anything. So that's minimal. You might sometimes go a little bit fancier, depending on your situations, but with extension functions, I think probably you want to have it a little bit simpler. But depends. Depends on whether it's clear where the extension function comes. Again, here, because I'm not adding anything, I'm using the same name as it was original, so it's total amount here or there. If I were doing some logic, I would be probably more explicit that it's not the original, it's not coming from there. Maybe I would even be it would be more appealing for me, maybe even not to do it extension function, but just a normal function, depending on how we're using it.
Yes, I was wondering why introduce a builder, because I think it quite introduces a maintainability problem in the sense that if you change, for instance, the variable name of your original payment, then your builder method won't change automatically. You have the default arguments with data classes, so why you have an additional builder? What does it add to it?
Well, first of all, in this case, the builder was just an example. Usually, if I go with function, I don't need a builder. I would have maybe in the same function, just with defaults, my data class constructed or something like that. Here, just that you can use it. But yeah, the builders can be useful sometimes. We will look in a second about that. Okay. Oh, no. Yes.
Do you have experience using copy? So you could
yes.
make one
Thank you.
flow object and then
I wanted this question, yes. So yes, it's possible also, especially for simple objects, you can have like a template, and instead of pass the parameters to the function, you can start doing copying. Again, more or less, well, the main problem for me was that as soon as you start to want to adjust the nested objects, especially, then it quickly becomes a mess. Well, at least in my experience, maybe you have good experience with that. So that was one reason to look more onto the function, because it can hide it a little bit, and especially to the builders wrapped with DSLs. But yeah, I don't have a compiling. Don't have very strong reason why not to use copies except for that, even though I personally prefer to use just functions with defaults. Okay. So let's go to a little bit more different example. So say I have now slightly more complicated data structure. So I have a policy with some ID, some details, and there is one level of nesting. So we have payments within policy. And that's what I said, that it might be already a little bit messy with functions. I will not be demonstrating how to do this with functions. I will show how to use builders with DSLs to test some functions which we could have, for example, here in some logic, which says whether we should alert on due payment or not. It gets the policy. It starts to go, does some logic, and says whether we should or not. I'll focus now on the testing of this bit. So again, if we were just to go the policy as it is, we have lots of extra noise. We might hide it. That's what we might hide some of this noise with the defaults of our data object. But again, those defaults might be not relevant for production code. That's where sometimes I had an issue where I don't want to have a default for production code, for example. I want to have something explicit. but if I have to, then it doesn't work with the test. Okay, we know that's not ideal, can work, but not very nice. Here is a good moment to start using builders, if we have builders. And we could use builders just from the Kotlin code. It says what's important for us, that the activation moment is some instant minus 10 seconds. We have payments, we have one payment with some details, and we have our test. And we have actually the builder here. Nothing really new to us, I guess. What is more interesting is that we can reduce a little bit of the noise of those builders. And that's where this great syntax sugar comes with receivers. How's it called again? I was forgetting. Something with receivers. Type-safe builders of Kotlin. So we can use the builder, even if it's outside of our control, and wrap it with a helper, with extension functions. Or we can extend the builder if it's in our control. And say, as it was demonstrated earlier today on the first presentation, you know what, I want to have the builder, but I don't want to have these details, how I'm building it, that I need to do a build. I just want to pass this adjust math block, which will be within the context of my builder, policy test builder. And it will adjust what it wants. So in the fact, I'm saying, given a policy, and within this block of the adjustment, I say, effectively this activated. So it will be activated of the post policy test builder. I will set this value. I can have the second level of the builder. So I can say I have a payment. In my experience, it was often like third level, some other details, and but I only can only have to put the important things. So I don't need to go to well, the verbosity basically very much decreased in comparison with non-builder way. And if I compare it with the builder, pure Java, it's also, well, I think there is much less noise because I don't need builds, I don't need to chain methods. It's clear separately from each other. So that helps with the nested, more complicated objects. What is also nice is that it's very much reusable. Okay, this is part of the builder, but because we can use nicety of DSL, we can say, for example, what if I want to have, what if I'm running an integration test where I want to have an entity already in my database or in some other store. So I want to say I want to have a persisted policy, and I would like to reuse the same way I'm building my policy. So here it's very easy to reuse the same concept. I can use the same builder. Actually, I don't even need to use a policy. I can just say a policy my policy. I can pass it adjust. Five minutes, good. I can pass it the adjuster. This is tricky thing that you need to get used a little bit. It's well, not complicated, but it's not straightforward. But then this adjuster, it will be working the same way as I was using it for just to give me a plain DTO. But at the end, in this case, I will also save it. So I know that, okay, I got the same object. It's saved in the database. I know that it will be, if I do some test that goes to database with this ID, it will be there. And what is nice here, and that's where it really works much better than copying. And well, with functions, I cannot easily do this because I will need, I cannot have another function. If I have completely another function, like given a persistent policy, then I need to copy all the signature, all the possible variations to the all the parameters to the new functions and repeat, and this will be growing, so I will be trying to minimize this. Or I need to have to use just wrapping of the functions in my test code. If I'm using copy, that it becomes also even more tricky because with the copy approach, where we're saying that we have data, some template, and then we're saying copy, it's difficult to control where you're copying, before something, for example, was saved or after you saved. So there can be tricky with this composition, if you know what I mean. If you don't, you may ask it soon. And we have any questions so far on this, on type-safe DSL?
You say that copy is a problem. You said that copy is a problem when you have nested structures, and that's definitely true when you just use bare-bone copy. But for instance, if you use optics with arrow, then you really can change a deeply nested structure, and only this one, and arrow takes care of that. Have you also looked at this one, or because it's of course it's a bit more esoteric, but just curious.
Yeah, that's the other side. That's true. I heard about that. I'm not a huge fan of arrow. I mean, I like to play with this, and I know, but I worked in some production code with arrow, and it was too much of a different mental model for me to switch easily. So I would not go for arrow just for that, let me put it this way. If I am in the arrow, yes, it's a different story. But here I'm more, I think, what's also important for me is that I was switching from Java. And I don't want to go, even Pauline said, go all Kotlin. No, I don't want to go all Kotlin. I want to use Spring, I want to use JUnit, I want to use AssertJ as long as it works, because then the difference between what I already know is smaller. And I can later say, okay, yeah, I want to use arrow maybe, or maybe I want to use code, as some people are saying, look, this thing would be nicer. Maybe, but I don't have to do this big bang from the very beginning.
Yeah, I like your builder approach to really minimize what you have to give, but I would use a mock in this case and only return in the mock the 3 or 5 parameters I need, and the 50 others were in the object.
Okay, now we're getting into very complicated subject of whether it's good to mock much or not mock much, and especially mock DTOs. I prefer not to mock DTOs. Well, I prefer to mock as little as possible, but okay, that's already a little bit on the personal choice. You can do it both. But I think mocking DTOs, at least in my experience it was always the most confusing thing that I could ever find, because I expect, especially when I'm changing the code, I change something and suddenly like it returns me something that I didn't expect, because someone said, oh, even though you passed this object, we will just be returning completely different something because it's mocked. Well, yeah, you can probably use it if it's only for this reason, but if it works for you. For me, I don't like mocking DTOs. Okay, our time is up. I will just quickly say that if you have any questions or comments, you can reach me out. And then Gurov, and together with Bart, who will be the next one, so I can steal 1 second from him. We're running friendly tech chats on the YouTube. Watch us, comment us. If you have ideas there, we can also discuss it with you. Thank you.
Give it up for Mykola. All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll be back in 5 with the bad side of Kotlin. Something like that. Ooh,
that was the sweet side.
The sweet side, and now the
that will be
sour
a
side.
sour side, yes.
See you in a bit.